is we are going to have a presenter today, and that presenter is Mr. Dave Wojcik. He is in the house from ClaimSecure. Dave's going to be talking today about using Formulary and Formulary Protect Plus, which is a unique process that ClaimSecure has to help control drug costs. And we've been using it with a lot of our clients for a number of years, and it's worked out very successfully. So Dave is going to be talking specifically about that particular service, if you would, or feature that ClaimSecure has on their platform. That's, in my opinion, very unique and very powerful in the industry. Dave's going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to have time for some discussion, and then we're going to circle back. Dave's going to speak a little bit more, then we're going to have some time for discussion as well, and then we're going to wrap things up right at 11 o'clock sharp. So it's going to be an hour-long presentation. At the end of the presentation today, you're going to get a number of things. You're going to get a copy of the slide deck. Dave, is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to get a copy of the slide deck. Thank you very much for sharing, Dave. In addition to that, you're going to get a CE certificate for participating. In addition to that as well, you're going to get a very short survey. And that survey is going to tell us how we did today and how we can do it better tomorrow. As well as that, you're going to hopefully give us future subjects that you'd like to see covered on future Zoomcasts as we do these throughout the year. So we really appreciate you coming. Benefits Trust, I'm the president and founder of the Benefits Trust. We started on January 1st, 1994, so we've been around almost as long as Richard Piefinch. And anyways, we've been around for a while.
Be careful.
We are a full-service third-party benefit administration company, and we work with advisors like yourselves. We do not sell direct. We work with advisors like yourselves. So if we're doing business together, we want to thank you very much, and we'd love to do more. And if we're not doing business together, we'd love to. We're open for business without a doubt. We're not sold out yet in 2022. We've got some capacity, so we'd love to do business with you. And we encourage you to visit thebenefitstrust.com and check us out. We'd also love the opportunity to speak to you about your business and how we can help you grow your business. So before we go on to Dave Wojcik, just a quick shout out. We're going to have a session on Feb 15th with Melanie LeBlanc from LifeWorks. She's going to talk about EAPs and how they're, or how she thinks and I think that they're the best value for benefits dollars being spent today because of certainly what's going on in our world. As well as that, on February 23rd, we're going to talk about improving the value proposition with effective communication skills. I'm going to be leading that session. And then I'm really excited about our session on March 2nd. We've got Ben Molinetta from Core Online Marketing that's going to talk about online marketing and the power of that today. And it's interesting. Online marketing means different things to different people, but it's an important part of our world today, without a doubt. So that's going to be a great session. So we hope to see you guys out. Don't forget, visit thebenefitstrust.com, check us out, and you can sign up for future sessions there as well. So you don't want to hear me speak, you want to hear Dave speak. So Dave, you and I have been working together for, gosh, I want to say probably close to the 28 years we've been in business, because you've been there for a long time, and we've been doing a lot of business over the years with ClaimSecure. ClaimSecure is our pharmacy partner. We use the ClaimSecure engine for all of our drug cards, and I've known Dave for many of those 28 years, unless or probably all of those 28 years. How long have you been there, Dave?
30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, 30 years. So from day one. And ClaimSecure is an incredibly valued partner, and Dave is such a valuable part of that team. It's just awesome. Now, a little bit of a change with ClaimSecure since I started working with them 28 years ago. They've gone through a number of changes, and now you have a new owner, and that new owner is Canada Life. And but you are kind of left. ClaimSecure is kind of left to run their business as they have for many years. And anyways, Dave, let's turn it over to you. And again, on behalf of all of us here at the Benefits Trust and all of us here today, we've got 88 participants so far. Dave, we want to say thank you very much for joining us, and welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Robert. As Rob said, I've been working with Rob for, well, he said 28 years, but they're one of our partner TPAs that we are totally in sync with, and one of the nicest guys to work with. So thanks very much for having me, Rob. I'm looking at the group of people here, and as people are signing on, I'm getting more and more intimidated with the quality of the people that are on here. I've got my golf coach is on, Bruce. Nice to see you. One of the smartest ex-Mercer consultants on here. There's just a number of real high quality people. Smartest actuary in Canada. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of this. So it's nice to see everyone. My name is Dave Wojcik. I'm the Vice President of Sales for Claim Secure. Have been working for the company for all of 30 of those years. Prior to that, I was in the pharmaceutical industry working for Eli Lilly and for Merck Frost before that in Montreal. During that stint, I was a product manager launching some drugs. I launched a product called Prozac, or relaunched the product called Prozac for Eli Lilly, and had an international stint with Merck launching drugs around the world for a couple of years. Today, I'm here to talk to you specifically about a unique product that we have called Protect Formulary, or Formulary Protect. There's two versions of it. I can tell you that we launched this back in March of 2016. It is a solution to target high-cost drugs. And for people that like the wait and see approach and see how it works before they start to jump on board with it, we now have 4,200 clients that are on this particular unique formulary. If I can get the next slide, please, Robert.
Dave, on that note, it's just before you go on, it's interesting. You said you launched the story in 2016 and you've got 4,200 clients with 100,000 active certificates. I think that is just absolutely awesome, because you guys are leaders in this particular field, and the only ones doing it, in my opinion. But like that's amazing growth. So thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, it was something that we brought out, interestingly enough, by the brokerage world, saying that they needed a solution for high cost drugs. And this particular slide is something that was interesting because plan sponsors were asking their advisors what they do to protect themselves against these high cost drugs. And I'd ask that each of you actually get your pen and paper out right now, because what I'm about to say in this next slide is exactly the collective thought of probably 60% of all the advisors that I talked to 3 years ago. Next slide, please. This is what they said. They really, were a little bit sort of shell shocked in what they could do, because the tools that they had to work with were, they say, well, if you have specialty drugs, we always insure them for you. You get an insure plan, a non-refund plan. They also can add on an ASO product with a stop loss as your way to protect yourself against these high cost drugs. And then some others are looking at plan design, such as drug caps. And of course, there's always the increase the copay to the member, but that's just shifting the costs. The challenge that I've had is that it just seems like, for some reason, since these drugs have come out from the pharmaceutical manufacturers, for some reason, the benefits community, the group benefits community, seems to be the financial safety net for these high cost drugs. And it puts an incredible amount of pressure on you as advisors coming up with solutions, and also for a small case market who is looking to provide benefits for their employees, but that can't necessarily financially pay for these drugs. So if I can get the next slide. So we came up with a solution, and it's called Formulary Protect. And it basically goes like this. If the problem is that the specialty drugs are causing the issue within your drug plan and creating all kinds of unnecessary risk, then you have to the solution has to target specialty drugs. The challenge we have with drug caps is they not only target specialty drugs, but they target all drugs. And that's the challenge. So we came up with this Protect Formulary, which basically, first of all, identifies every specialty drug, and by definition, a specialty drug is anything over $10,000 annually. So that would include a lot of the biologics, for example, and a lot of the new designer drugs that are coming out. But they're $10,000 on average. And what we've done is we've just simply removed them all from coverage. That sounds a little bit radical at the start, but the idea here is if you can't afford these, then don't expose your client to the risk of specialty drugs. They can't afford them, they can't afford them. So it protects the client from having to pay for these drugs. But the important part of this, and the real secret sauce, is it attempts to find alternative funding for those members who happen to get prescribed one of these medications if your company's not paying for it. If I can get the next slide. So there's two products. One's called Formulary Protect and one's Formulary Protect Plus. Formulary Protect takes all of the high-cost medications, the high-cost specialty drugs, and removes them from the formulary. And the Protect Plus removes all high specialty drugs except for the ones that are not covered under the provincial formulary. Now, what's the difference? We're looking for alternatives to get these drugs covered. But if one of the main alternatives we use is the provincial formularies, but if the provincial formularies do not cover these medications, then we will put the Protect Plus formulary will put these specialty drugs back on the formulary. It's sort of, I'm a big proponent of Protect formulary. If you decide you can't pay for these medications, then take them all off, and hopefully we can find alternative funding. Protect Plus is sort of like half on, half off. We're saying we'll take most of them off, but we'll also act as a bit of a safety net in case we can't find alternative funding. As far as, yes.
Dave, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
When you say alternative funding, maybe you can spend a moment talking about alternative funding.
Can you give me a slide?
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Wow,
So
that was good.
Yeah, Robert actually saw this presentation before that, so thanks for the setup. No, the alternative funding that we look at, the first is, of course, the needs is spousal coverage. If your spouse has coverage and you're not covering them, well then they will be second payer and hopefully get them covered. The other large area that we look at are the provincial drug plans, and appreciate that each province has different drug plans, different coverages depending on the situation. We know, like for example, there's BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba have Pharmacare, Alberta, New Brunswick, PEI, Ontario sort of have a different alternative. Nova Scotia is a bit of a challenge because of high deductibles. And Quebec, you cannot do this. This program does not work in Quebec. It is because you have to follow all the RAMQ rules. So you can appreciate them putting in a formulary like this. You actually have to have a series of formularies by province to be able to properly work. And that's why it's very difficult for somebody to replicate it. Somebody who outsources their drug program to a TELUS or ESI would be virtually impossible because you'd be asking them to do all the programming. And you'd also have to do your own programming on your own end too for your own system. So we find alternative funding, and I'll give you some metrics in a second on how successful we've been. We also have to help the individual member with the application process. So we give them all the drug history. We tell in the application, we include all the different drugs that they've been on in the past, what's worked, what hasn't. We show that there's no coverage for this particular plan, and we will help them with the application forms. And then finally, the last part of this coverage navigation is we advocate on behalf of the member who is a relatively naive consumer, if you will. So we will advocate with the case manager, with the physician specialist if we need more information, with the manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and any provincial administrators we may need. Next slide, please.
Well, just on that note, Dave, one of the things that we have certainly found in our block of business when we have clients that are covered with Formulary or Protect Plus, the advocacy component is critical, but because when somebody is in need of one of these drugs, they're doing it because it's a very emotional time for them. They've got an illness, they've got something that they've got to certainly deal with. It's significant. They're not taking this because they're not taking a specialty drug because they've got a headache. It's something that is really going wrong. And the advocacy component is critical. And one of the things, some of the feedback that we've had on the advocacy component is the folks at Claim Secure, and I'm tooting your horn here, Dave, the folks at Claim Secure are extraordinarily professional when assisting these particular clients at a very emotional time for them. These specific members are having this difficult time. It's very emotional, and as I like to say, they at Claim Secure, the advocacy folks, the advocacy department, if you would, are very caring people. They're very professional. They're incredibly attentive. The communication experience has been nothing but stellar. And Dave, maybe can you expand on that just a touch? Because I think it's important.
I don't know what else I can say to blow my horn, but thank you. We do tell our group that compassion is one of the most important things that we can help with in this situation, because these individuals are taking tertiary medications with advanced diseases. It gets extremely important, especially when we're dealing with more immediate needs such as cancer medications. And unfortunately, because we know how to navigate through the provincial programs, we can identify those kinds of applications with the provincial governments to help fast track those applications when needed. So yes, the group that helps out in getting these patient assistance and helping with the individual understanding their disease state is great. I would say that the case manager that they work with, the pharmaceutical manufacturers, is equally as important, and we work very closely with them.
Yeah. Just a couple questions. Or just Dave, if we could just hold on for a second. Jen, you had a question. Jen Walker.
Yeah, you're going to make me come on screen. Yes, I had a question just in regards to the Protect Plus. I struggle with that. If Protect captures 95%, but you've got a product for Protect Plus, that implies that there's enough falling through the cracks that we need that. Do you have any stats to give us an idea of what falls through, what doesn't, how it captures?
Jen, great question. I will show you some stats on our success rate on being able to find alternative coverage, and we'll even break it down by source of funding too. If you wait a couple of slides, I'll help you with that, okay?
And just one more before we go. Gord Cowan, how are you, Gord? And you've got a question. Maybe you can jump on and ask that question to Dave.
Well, I believe you're going to come to the answer, but some of us, and as you say, the caliber of the people on this call is phenomenal. And I believe a lot of the advisors on this call already do a lot of this, but on a case-by-case basis, very onerous, very time-consuming, and so on. I can say from personal experience, my doctors, oncologists have got these phenomenal drugs paid for, and there was really no work on my part to do. They have an automatic process. So what I'm trying to understand is, in the life of one of these submissions, can you help us understand what is automated, what is the process versus what I do already for clients? So if you can take that off our back, that sounds fantastic. We know the other carriers do very little to nothing, and that's what I'm looking to get out of this.
Okay, thanks.
Rob?
Yeah.
So I like to bring up something in discussion, and hopefully that Dave can take us through this. I'm personally, as an advisor, I'm going through one of these things right now. So for years, I suffered from migraines, and of course, I've had different sort of drug therapies that I've gone through, and recently, I've been on a biological. Anyway, so I'm now and I understand this whole process. I like to know about the case thing, because I'm having to advocate for myself. What happened was I went on a biological through Lilly, and the problem is my wife, I was on my wife's plan. She recently retired, so we went from unlimited coverage to a limited coverage at $4,000. And what happened was, it was a whole question. Was the drug covered, not covered? Turns out it's covered. And then when I'm coming off the plan support from Lilly, they said, oh, don't worry, we'll cover it, well, whatever. Well, it turns out they're not covering it. Basically, what happens is they're going to basically raid my plan, basically eat up all of my plan, and then I'm going to be out of pocket for several $1,000s. So I've had to have it. Yeah. So the whole question is, I'm having to advocate for myself, be interested to know about the advocacy. I have to go through the whole process myself now.
So David, thank you very much. And Gord, thanks for the question as well. So the advocacy component, I think, is critical. Dave,
really important. Yeah.
Dave, maybe you could expand on that. Like, it's all of a sudden, hey, you said the client, the member submits or the family member submits a drug claim, and then it says, at the pharmacy, denied. Now what happens?
So I'm going to go through that algorithm in a slide or two. So let's talk about that. And just to take a step back, is Gord did raise a comment, and I just want to address that before I move on to the sort of the algorithm for coverage. Gord, there's two components to it. You said that the specialist is helping you navigate drug coverages or alternative funding methods. Yes. Which is fantastic. They do definitely play a key role, especially the specialist, like a rheumatologist, who navigates his way through and knows all the different types of coverages. They've done a really good job. They tend to be very regional in their solutions, though. So a specialist working in Ontario tends to know Trillium. Doesn't always necessarily know every single one of the different provinces and all the nuances within that. So totally I think that's one of the one of the advantages that we have being a national company and knowing how to marry up to each one of the provincial coverages. The second challenge is that we deal with a lot of different disease states. So one specialist would deal normally in one disease state. We deal in, or at least one solution, like an autoimmune, for example, or like a rheumatologist would, but we deal in all types of different disease states. Drugs are coming on fast and furious. I think there's 150 applications in this year alone for specialty drugs. So we review each one of those and determine where it fits into the formulary, if it's over 10,000, if it's under 10,000, depending on the range of the therapy. So there's a lot of different, I would say, dynamics that go on to maintaining the formulary list and being able to interact cohesively with each one of the provinces, for example. So what happens when we bring on a new group, and I'll talk a bit about the automation too, Gord, I haven't forgot about that part of your question. What happens if we bring on a new group? Well, when we're bringing on a new group, the first thing we try to do is try to get a detailed claims history of the company. We do that a lot for the stop loss portion to determine what exactly we're dealing with from a pooled standpoint. But what it also allows us to do is to proactively identify any high-cost drugs that are specialty drugs that are on there. Top 25 DINs, for example, is a perfect way for us to do that. When we identify those individuals, we will send out a welcome package to them. And I say identify, we usually get that information directly from the carrier, the previous carrier. So we have, they still have anonymity. We respect their privacy. We'll send out a welcome package to those individuals if we do have the contact information. And then we will start the process for getting their consent for us to advocate on their behalf, trying to find out more about what they're currently up against. Do they have spousal coverage, et cetera? And then we will follow them along until we find some alternative funding for them. So we will continuously follow up with them. Not everybody is good with their follow-up skills as a patient. They're not really sure what to do next. They don't know which way to turn. It's not like they're driving to a store. They're driving into an area they have never been before, so they don't even know where the destination is. That's where I think we come into play for the most part. If I can get the next slide, please, Robert. And David, I'm going to be coming back to your question you had earlier on, okay, in a second. So I think this is going to help you with this. And the first thing I'd mention before I go on, David, is that in your situation, if you're advocating on your own behalf, I can get you my number and we'll set you up with our coverage navigation group, and we'll do you one solid to try to help you through your process, okay? So what usually happens is either we get a proactive identification of the individual or we bump up against them because we haven't been able to identify who's on which drug. When I say bump up against them, when the group comes on, they'll get a reject message at the pharmacy saying that they need to go through an application process, and they will immediately phone our toll-free line. The toll-free line will get them in touch with our coverage navigation group, and we will get all the information to that member so they can fill out all their tombstone data, if you will, so that we have the contact information that we need to work on their behalf. Then we will look at each one of the different alternative therapy ways to fund it, whether it be spousal, the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assistance Program, or the government's. And then we will coordinate. So we'll help out with any special authorization forms that are required. We'll look at the spousal plans and help them with that if it's available. We know all the manufacturers intimately so that we know what their programs look like, and we work with all the different case managers. And we also prepare the provincial applications and help them out. And all the provinces who actually adjudicate these, they're individual people, and they get judged and measured on the accuracy of them adjudicating the applications, but also the quantity. And when they see one of our envelopes, I can tell you it goes to the top of the list simply because they know it's going to be a complete file. And most of the problems in adjudicating these is usually information that's given is incomplete. The only exception of the provinces where we don't always seem to get preferential treatment is in the province of Alberta, and they have a strict first in, first out policy. So we follow in queue. And that application form can take up to 90 days. And we've even seen a couple where it's gone longer than that. Incidentally, if we're going through this process, we will have the medications covered that they're currently on if they don't have enough supply, because continuity of care is extremely important. And we help the plan sponsor and the advisor know that we will continue providing the medications until such time we find the alternative funding.
So they're not left out in the cold.
They're not left out of the cold during the application process, but there is a possibility that we don't find alternative funding, and then, if you will, they are left out of the cold. So it's not an absolute perfect solution, Robert. I used to call this presentation the dirty reality. It's not 100% foolproof, and quite frankly, nothing we do in our business is 100% foolproof, but we've been pretty successful, and I'll show you our results in a second. But the important part is if you are trying to transition somebody from having coverage onto our program, and we do have the ability to get the application, and we think we can find alternative funding, and we usually know in advance because of our experience, we will make sure that there's no loss of medication during that time. Next slide. So here's the results. I think, Jen, you were the one who was asking about this. We've had this programming in place since March of 2016 through this is the results into August. So we have 100,000 certs to about 4,100 active groups, and we've had about a 95.73 success rate of finding alternative funding for those individuals. You can see it by province. And the breakdown. So if you look on the right-hand side for Ontario, we find that we get alternative funding about 30% of the time, 30.23, if I can direct your eyes over there. We find that the government will provide financial coverage, some 18.43 is pharma companies. We also are able to get the spousal coverage about 12% of the time. And then there's a combination, so catch-all, where we use more than one solution. So, for example, we may have the government picking up everything, but the member has a 4% net household income deductible that they have to satisfy. It's not uncommon for the pharma companies to pick up that amount. I know people say, hey, they're supposed to be paying it out of their own pocket, not finding alternative for that, but it would be a real challenge for them to follow up if they were trying to figure out where the financial assistance is coming from. The pharma companies do step up to the plate in those situations. And that's in Nova Scotia, we have very little luck because the deductible in the provinces is so high. So if you have somebody in Nova Scotia, it's going to be a bit of a challenge for us. And so you also you see 3% of the time it goes back onto the Formulary Protect Plus solution, meaning it comes back onto the plan, and that's a situation where the government is not covering that particular drug, so therefore we lose that avenue for finding alternative funding. So we put that drug back on our plan, and the only criteria then is if we can't find the pharma companies or spousal coverage, then we evaluate it best on the special authorization criteria, making sure that the drug is used appropriately, they've tried other drugs, and if they do qualify, they will be covered under the plan. We do see some unsuccessful attempts, and that is usually people who are off-label, meaning that they're taking a medication for an indication that's not approved by Health Canada. And that does happen. A lot of the specialists are innovators in the way they treat, and they look at the modality of the drug and what it does, and they might match it up to an indication that's not covered. So hopefully that answers your question, Jen, about sort of, reason why we wouldn't see success. There's a couple other smaller ones, but even we have situations where we have an application that's come in and the person just ghosts on us. I mean, they all of a sudden, we don't hear back from them. Maybe they've left the company, we're not sure, but they just totally ghost on us. So there's that's considered unsuccessful also.
Dave, a couple of quick questions. Drew Hubbard, is Claim Secure connected to RXI?
RXI.
Drew, can you shed some light on this?
You might be on mute.
Sorry, sorry. I'm back in action here. Yeah, we've had some dealings with a TPA who provides this type of service for clients that have like a drug cap or some kind of a formulary in place, whereby they'll do a very similar, provide a very similar service, and the cost to the employer is $3,000. It's like, it's either a one-time payment or you pay $250 a month. And even if the drug's approved and it continues year in, year out, it's still just that $3,000. And if somebody's fully insured, then the $3,000 just gets added to the plan sponsor's claims. And if it's ASO, then they just take it out $250.
Yeah, so there's
a month.
There are some. Yeah, I've seen some third parties that are out there also. Drew, we're not associated or attached to them. They'll have their own method for navigating through the gauntlet to try to find alternative coverage. I can tell you, to put things in perspective, we charge our clients for this coverage navigation a one-time fee of $250 for our service.
I was going to ask that. And can I just get some clarification, Dave? Thanks. Just when you reference the chart now, and I don't see it. Let's just get it back up here. When you reference that 100%, is that from varying sources? Is that 100% of the cases get coverage, or is that 100% of the cost of the drugs? So in other words, is there a mix of co-insurance involved there, or does that 100% represent the total cost is covered?
It's by case. So if you look on the left-hand table, you'll see there's 449 cases of the total number of cases, which is 1358. So it's just the division 449 divided by 1358. Of all of our caseload, 449 is we get coverage to the government.
Right, but to what is it all over the map in terms of to what degree, to what percentage of the cost is covered?
It can be, yes, because there's sometimes you get provincial governments that are involved where there's a net household income deductible. Right. There's some co-pays that are involved. We don't guarantee we can cover all those off. Right. But we make an attempt at it. So these stats are saying, have we found alternative funding that is material in nature, usually, probably in excess of 85% of the overall cost of the medication. Right. And it's interesting that in a lot of situations, we see the average copay for a drug is 22% in Canada. That's a national number that we have in our book of business. So if you find alternative coverage for them, the 20% out of pocket that they were paying before is far less, or far more than the net household income deductible that they might have to pay with a province, or a premium they have to pay with the province. So sometimes it's a win-win for the member also.
So Dave,
that's great, Dave. Thanks for clarifying.
Thanks, Drew. Dave, this is awesome. We're getting a lot of questions in here. So could we just pause for a moment and have some of these questions?
Sure.
Pierre Sadek, want to jump on and ask your question? I think it's a great question.
Yes, well, thank you. Thanks. Great presentation, Dave. I'm not sure if you're mentioning in pharma assistance is maybe it's the same thing that I'm trying to explain. If everything else fails, sometimes, and I saw this in Quebec, for example, here we call the pharmaceutical, try to find a way for them to get them on compassionate or clinical trial program. So it costs them zero. I'm sure you've seen that, or was a deep discount. So is it something which is included in your pharma assistance, or is something separate?
You just need to ask the question one more time for me, Pierre. I'm not too sure exactly what the question is. If all else fails, what happens?
If a government doesn't work, voucher doesn't work, combination doesn't work, nothing else works, and you try to, it's the last resort. You pick up the phone, you call Merck's, you call Eli Lilly, you call one of them, and let's say it's a drug that it's done by Pfizer, for example. You call Pfizer, you see if there's a program on which you can put the patient on a compassionate care program or a clinical trial program, so that perhaps that particular patient doesn't have to pay in that specific case. So it's like an exception base. Have you seen that? Have you tried to do that?
Yeah, I would say that when we talk about the pharmaceutical manufacturers' patient assistance programs, we also try to exercise compassionate care. The clinical trials that we see where they'll look at something might be for a drug that, let's say, I don't know, I'm using an example, Remicade, which might be used for rheumatoid arthritis, but doesn't have an indication in ankylosing spondylitis. I'm making this up. Some other ones do. They might, they might pick up the cost of that drug because they're looking for the indication anyway, and they're going through the application process. So they might pick up something there. But if we can get them to deal in a compassionate way and pay for it, that's great. I would say that is happening less and less with the pharmaceutical manufacturers, especially if they have the indication already, and they're not, and we can't find alternative funding. I do see the pharmaceutical manufacturers being very good about making up a difference. If there's 20-30% difference on the cost versus the coverage we can find, they'll pick up that difference. But for them to pick up the entire amount, it's been a challenge, especially when you're looking at some of these ultra high cost drugs, $200,000 or $300,000, $400,000. I was talking to one of my former colleagues who has a drug that they use for $400,000, and they bring it down to 300, and they think that they're doing everybody a solid by reducing it to 300 for an individual, but there's still a $300,000 claim, so it's a challenge. The reality is, when we see unsuccessful, which is about 4.27%, those are situations where we just have not found alternative funding at all. And then you're in a situation there, then they go, what now? And some of our advisors ask me, well, if all else fails, can we put them back on the plan? Well, the challenge with that is it would be totally offside. We'd be misrepresenting that we were not covering the medication. A lot of provinces want to be last payer, but they don't want to be first payer, and that would be really a first payer situation where you say you don't cover it, the province says they don't cover it, then all of a sudden you do pick it up. If we ever got audited in those situations, it would be a real problem for us. So if we cannot find alternative funding, then it does get a little bit tricky. I do know that we have had the situations where the client has grandfathered individuals who came to us, and we haven't found alternative funding, because that's normally when it happens. They've grandfathered those individuals, and that is totally on side with the governments too. They don't mind if you're grandfathering during transitions, but if you do not cover those medications for future new starts, then you're not offside, and the employee who wants that medication knows that your company does not cover it, and you've been ahead of it, and you've communicated that to everybody. So it's not like you're picking on any one individual, and then there's a constructive dismissal situation coming up.
Debbie's got a great question as well, Dave. Debbie Telfer.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
There seems to be an awful lot of, focus is maybe not the right word, but there's a lot of mental and nervous drugs right now being used. And we know that pharmacogenetics is really effective in identifying which drug is the best for the patient. Is that something that ClaimSecure is using as part of their protocols?
We haven't got into the pharmacogenetics at this point. I can tell you that before we were bought by Canada Life, McKesson was heavily involved in that area and trying to find out solutions around that area. And they've looked at a number of different companies that are talking about how good they are at trying to identify proper drugs or designer drugs for individuals. Unfortunately, that was above my pay grade. I don't know where it went, but it certainly didn't happen as quickly as we were expecting it to. It sort of like was looked at and then brushed off to the side. I hear a lot about it in conferences, Debbie. I do hear that people are out there. I know we have Chris Bonnet on the call. He's probably one of the guys that probably knows more about this than I do. I know he knows more about this, so I don't know if he wants to come off a mic and make a comment on it.
Dave, thanks for the shout out. I can just end really quickly. We looked at PGX testing, pharmacogenetic or genomic testing in a study last year, and it's really, really, really early stages for all of the carriers on this. They don't even really have good data. So I expect that this is an evolving question. It will take another year or two before the carriers have enough data to determine whether or under what cases they're going to require or pay for pharmacogenomic testing to help pick the best available drug for a patient. Now, that said, CADTH, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health, just issued a study in the last few days that reported, as they did a complete literature search on pharmacogenomic testing, mixed results. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. They said the quality of the evidence was generally pretty poor, pretty thin. So despite all of the talk, it's kind of marketing, I guess, that's running ahead of the evidence at this point in time on pharmacogenomic testing.
Hey, Chris, thank you very much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you being on the call as well. So thanks for jumping in with no notice. So thanks, I appreciate that. Hey, Gordo, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, just personal experience with this. I'm an early adopter of a lot of things, but before I do that, I make sure I do as much vetting as I can. And I personally use this in two examples. One was for cancer, one was for heart. I went through two different labs to do comparative. One was arranged through MedCan, and one was through the gentleman you use for second opinion. I can't recall his name, sorry, Robert.
Rupert Case Manager.
Rupert.
Yeah.
I got both results. I submitted them to the doctors, the family physicians, the specialists, and the pharmacy. And they all come back, said, that's nice, we'll put it in your file, but it's of no use. Okay, so I think what the gentleman just said, and I'm not saying, I'm just one example, but what it did was say, caution, yellow light, go forward, but don't be adamant that it's great for everybody and it's circumstantial based on the people. So I just wanted to say, just don't go forward and just say, yeah, this is good for everybody in broad brush, like the insurance and the marketing is doing right now. So that's just a personal experience.
Thanks for sharing, Gordon. Appreciate it. Dave, you want me to move on to the next slide?
Please, thank you. So people ask, well, have you made have you been successful with this? And I would suggest that we have. 95.73 is a very high number. It's not perfect, but we also see this on more of our book of business. And we look at the industry, what percentage of specialty drugs represents the total drug spend of the average company. We're seeing the trend up as high now in 2020 at 28%, a little over 28%. And we've been lagging behind by about 4%, especially in 2020, and we continue to see that. So 4% isn't a big number, but it is a big number in this business. So that we think that we're having a material impact, not only on the utilization or the amount of dollars that's been spent on specialty drugs for the average plan, but also has a major impact on our stop loss rates and what that's been able to do there. So if you do continue to have stop loss on these groups, which I recommend you do anyway, you tend to be able to get stop loss breaks on pricing, and you certainly have a lot more consistency on that. Next slide. I must have missed one slide, unfortunately. I apologize, but I was just going to mention to you that if you're looking at the dollars and cents on this, if you are able to put somebody on one of these formularies, then recognize that if you are taking a person off the plan sponsor's drug plan, then you're immediately saving, let's call it $10,000, if that's where your stop loss is. You immediately save the cost of that $10,000 because you have it being removed from $1. You save the ASO adjudication fee on that. You save the stop loss fee that's on that particular drug. And in addition, you also get a reduction in the stop loss rate that you're using. So that stop loss rate's applied to all drugs. So you can see a number of different cost savings opportunities for you. You lose the claim itself, you lose the ASO fee on it, you lose the stop loss fee on it, and you also have a lower stop loss fee on your overall drug plan. And all those reasons and drug cost savings is not the reason why I'd recommend this. I'd recommend this is because you have a client that when you ask them, can you afford a $50,000 drug? And if they say no, or if they say yes, you ask them, can you afford the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one? Because it's not if, it's when now. And if they come up and they say, no, we can't afford these medications, then you're probably a good candidate. They're a good candidate for this particular plan. If they say, oh, don't worry, I got insurance, or I have stop loss. Well, we all know that we stop loss is a nice temporary solution, but if you have a high cost drug, you are forever stuck with that drug on that patient. And no matter where you try to shop it out, the carriers will have that information. This is not like an LTD claim that stays with your incumbent carrier. This follows you everywhere you go. So if they can't afford these medications, I suggest to you that it doesn't make sense to have a drug plan that exposes them to a drug they can't afford. This is something that when we talk to Canada Life about, because they provide us a stop loss and now they're our owners, they would love to be able to have this product. They would suggest that they are unfortunately too newsworthy, and the Bleeding Hearts would love an opportunity to put Canada Life on notice that saying big bad Canada Life is not covering one of the medications. And that's the challenge that they have. We have seen alternative programs that are out there. We saw, Manulife, I think it's called Drug Watch or something, where if they are bringing these new medications in, they will increase your premiums if they want to include them. So they are doing it out there. I just think that our way is, although people might think it a bit more aggressive, it is a proper solution, and it's more black and white, and it's had an incredibly successful run that we've seen. One last question and one last thought I get from people saying, well, what happens if one day the provinces wake up and say, we're no longer going to be covering these drugs if your plan doesn't cover it? I would suggest to you that if that does happen one day, they probably will grandfather anybody who they're currently covering. It would be very hard for them to remove coverage. And the second thing is, I'd feel sorry for the Minister of Health who made that call to all of a sudden say that they're no longer going to be covering specialty drugs, because that would go over like a lead balloon.
Political suicide.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I presented right next to somebody from the Trillium program, the EAP program, and he heard everything I said, and he came up afterwards and he said, and that's why our program is there for people to get coverages when their companies don't cover them. He didn't immediately go back and start to tell his group what had happened. So, and let's say worst case scenario, in 10 years from now, they do decide to remove it. Well, you've had a client for the last 10 years that have benefited from the program. If you do nothing, you will be exactly where you're fearing 10 years from now if they ever take it away. So I don't see any downside. You just have to make sure that the client knows that it's not a perfect solution, that it may or may not work, If you do ever have something like this and you're putting it through Benefits Trust, Rob gives me a phone call and he says, Dave, can you check on this medication? Here's the province in which they're taking it. What's the likelihood of coverage? And we pretty well know if we're going to be able to get coverage for that individual. So we can do it in advance, and it helps you providing a solution or talking about a solution only when you actually have a fairly high knowledge of what the outcome is going to be.
You know, you brought up a great point earlier as well, Dave, that, you know, you said you know all of the manufacturers, you know the provincial governments. Not only that, they know you, right? So they know that when the file comes in, it's going to be complete. They know that they're dealing with professionals. It's that two-way street. So you're buying this advocacy, you're buying this someone that's a professional, professional interaction, which I think is absolutely critical. And that point that you brought up about knowing the information, you know, knowing whether or not this is going to be paid, not for sure necessarily, but having a really, really good idea. It's very reassuring at this process, or at the time that this happens, because it happens again fairly quickly. All of a sudden, an employee is diagnosed with something. They've got to take this medication. They're panicking. They're emotional, right? And they want friendly, happy people to wrap their arms around them and deal with them. And from your point of view and an employer's point of view, right, they're looking to you for advice, and they want a response right away or very, very quickly, and they want someone to help them in this area. And this is a way that you can provide extraordinary value for your clients by helping their members at the time of need. And I think that's one of the most critical points on this. It's not only just moving the costs over to other opportunity or other organizations, it's about helping your employee. And the fact of the matter is the majority of us are working with smaller groups. Yes, Dave, in your organization, you work with some of the largest companies in Canada, right? But how we've used this at the Benefits Trust when we're dealing with smaller clients, hey, if you've got an employee with an employer, with 10 employees and one of them gets sick, it's everybody's business. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it in the company. And all of a sudden, they're looking at you as an advisor, and they're looking at the partners that are involved in this benefit program, and you're able to give immediate and very quick response in helping them out in a professional manner, and in an ethical manner and a compassionate manner. It's an extraordinary value-added service that you can bring to the table. So not only at the time of discussion, it's a value-added service, but at the time of claim, it's an invaluable service, actually. Has anybody have any comments? Anybody have any thoughts? We got a few moments left. I know Chris, you had a question. Chris Price.
Now you put me on the spot. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Sorry, I just got a lot of stuff to get out this morning. So there are patient assistant programs that are out there almost for every specialty biologic, in my estimation. So normally the problem arises when somebody's moving from some specialty med to another. And, you know, obviously that does happen from time to time. So it just seems to me that you guys are duplicating essentially what every specialty pharma company does. Am I missing something?
I would suggest that the specialty pharma is more about compliance and adherence and information around the disease state and the management of the disease state and the drugs that they're using. Our service is more trying to find financial coverages for them through the different avenues that they may have, whether it be private or public. I don't know if that answers your question or that helps.
No, I actually disagree with that, just because I know my wife has been my wife works pharma, and she actually sells specialty pharma, and I know they have a very vested interest in making sure that these $20,000-$30,000 biologic drugs get reimbursed, because if they don't get reimbursed, right, they don't make any money. So I know that they're actively involved in working with, whether it's rheumatologists or any type of specialist, to make sure that there's coverage for their medication. So I don't think it's just advocacy. I totally think it's reimbursement. And that's just my personal opinion, but you know, I don't.
I would. I'm sure they do that. I'm sure they. It's a little granular for me, but I'm sure they would contact our coverage navigation team internally and try to find out the information that they would need to help with the application and getting coverage for them. So they would probably want to know if the drug's covered on our program. If it's not, a letter coming from us. I'm sure that there's probably a coordination going on that I'm not aware of, but the pharmaceutical manufacturers play a really important role. And I know that every single drug that's out there, there is a case manager or some type of program that's set up with that specialty drug. It seems to be adherent. You get the drug and you also get the case management at the same time. So yes.
Dave, there's a lot more questions, but I just have a few moments left. Is there someone in your organization or yourself that if anybody has any questions or want further information about this from you specifically or from Claim Secure specifically, is there someone that they can contact?
I would say probably give me an email or go through you, Robert, and give it to me. I'll pass it on to clinical.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there is an email. It's probably called clinicalservices@claimsecure.com.
So send me an email and then I'll pass on your question to. We'll get you the answer. Yeah, without a doubt,
Okay.
we'll get you the answers.
But recognize that in these situations, we only are as good as the information that we have on file with an individual. So it's hard for us to be good at doing coverage navigation for somebody who's not a current client of ours, because that's part of the whole extract and the application process and having that information. So for example, we can't do coverage navigation for our friends over at Canada Life on their files at this point. But we certainly can, for example, David earlier on asked a number of questions. I did pass my information on to him. Hopefully we can help him out, and I'd love to help. If anybody has a personal situation, we can try to help them out too. We do have resources, and at least they can give you some guidance.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we're just about out of time, so I want to take this opportunity, Dave, to give you a big thank you very much for sharing with us today. That is absolutely awesome. You've really opened up a lot of questions and some great discussion. And I think our Zoomcast series today was successful. I think it was very successful. Everybody in the room got smarter. So, Dave, that's because of you and your organization and the message that you shared with us, as well as all of the great interaction and discussions. We are open for business at the Benefits Trust. We've got this Formulary and Formulary Protect program. We can link it on to any one of our accounts. But it's important that you as advisors have the discussion with your clients. I think that's critical. And Dave, you made the great point, can you afford a $50,000 drug? And if they say yes, can you afford the next one and the next one? Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So it's important as advisors to have these discussions. You can do it with 5 live cases. You can do it with 3 live cases. You can do it with 25 live cases. You can do it with 10,000 live cases. Claim Secure is definitely a fantastic solution. They're leaders in this industry. Don't pass over this saying this is just hogwash. This is real. It's working for 100,000 people. And what was it, 4,200 clients you've got on the program now, Dave? And growing rapidly. Thank you very much.